Welcome, dear friends and colleagues, to the World Languages and Literatures Research Symposium. It's our privilege to welcome you to this event. I'm an instructor in the School of Foreign Languages at Pamukkale University. We are going to listen to our second keynote speaker from among our symposium's truly star-studded cast. Today, I'm honored to present Professor Janina Brutt-Griffler, one of the leading thinkers of second language acquisition and pedagogy in applied linguistics. Before we hear her keynote speech, I would like to speak for a moment about Professor Janina Brutt-Griffler, whose focus and dedication I admire greatly. All of us still remember many of our teachers from kindergarten all the way to university. Some of our memories of them may gradually fade, and some of the teachers may only survive in our memories as vague and superficial sketches attached to particular moments in life. But some of these teachers are actually quite important in the stories we build of ourselves. And of such teachers, we sometimes have extraordinarily extensive and detailed memories. Even more, some of these teachers served and still serve as role models or as people who defined our trajectories and identities at critical moments in life. Professor Brutt-Griffler is one of those teachers for me, and I am sure for many others as well. She teaches with the realization that her role in the lives of her students is that of an educator, not just a lecturer or a teacher. I met Professor Brutt-Griffler when I went to the US as a Fulbright scholar to pursue my doctoral degree, and lucky me, I learned that she would be my advisor. The professional part of life is always intertwined with the non-professional parts, often in uneasy and poorly balanced ways. I lost my father in the middle of my PhD program, and during those challenging times, she's been a tremendous help for me to reconcentrate on my academic journey. From then on, she has ever been a true mentor for me, and I deeply appreciate the counsel and guidance she gave me when I was writing my dissertation. Her tenured perspective has always allowed me a broader perspective in shaping my studies. She still continues helping me in several aspects of academic endeavors. For example, I deeply appreciate her wisdom and guidance while planning this symposium as well. I would like to thank her in your presence. The important things in her academic success can be summarized in a few key words: to give, to educate, and to inspire. She gives her students the best she has to give. That means she doesn't give her students old and pedestrian information, but gives them the most recent and most advanced insights and thoughts. She educates her students by drawing them into the world of current research, exposes them to the most advanced issues and discussions in the field. She shows them complex and demanding data, and she inspires them, the students, by allowing them into her kitchen, not just into her shop. Besides her great mentorship, she has been one of the mover shakers of the field of applied linguistics. Her book, World English, a study of its development, is a winner of an award from the Modern Language Association of the US, one of the most prestigious awards in the field. The book, which is a historical review of English, has debunked the conception of the English language as being the culprit for many developments in the world. Professor Brutt-Griffler has published numerous other books and peer-refereed research articles in prestigious venues focusing on the comparative and cross-national study of education, educational policies, curricula of English, also focusing on multilingual, multicultural learning, and educational systems. Taking a cross-national perspective, her central goal has been to uncover the variables that contribute to building successful academic learning environments, provide policy recommendations for P16 transitions, as well as guide teachers and school leader professional development, including dual language programming to improve educational experiences among all multicultural students. She created a hub for international students like me. Professor Brutt-Griffler is also a leader. She's the Associate Dean and Director of Language Programs at the State University of New York at Buffalo. She brings extensive research, senior level leadership, and university teaching in English language education in the US and internationally, including University of Vienna in Austria and the University of York in New York in UK. She served as an external evaluator for academic programs and universities, including the ones in the Middle East. She has served as the head of the Department of Educational Leadership and Policy and Director of Research Center in Comparative and Global Education. In these roles, she has directed research teams, large-scale funded research projects and programs. She developed academic curricula, organized academic conferences, and mentored faculty and graduate students in research and teaching. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me turn the team's podium over to Professor Janina Brutt-Griffler for her keynote speech. Professor, the floor is yours.
Hatice, I am so moved and want to thank you for such a personal and professional, warm welcoming. You are the gift to everyone in terms of your insights, your professional work, and you are inspiration to all of us. So I just want to thank you so much for this wonderful, wonderful introduction. And you reminded me of all of the moments that we have spent together at the University at Buffalo in New York. And we had such vibrant intellectual environment, and you were an incredible voice part and a rising star in the field. So I just want to say thank you so much for this incredible introduction, for personal and professional snapshot of my life with you. So,
privilege is mine. Thank you for your encouragement.
Thank you. I want to take a moment to say a word of thank you to Pamukkale University's senior leadership, Professor Ahmed Kulthan, rector of the rector of the university, and Professor Arsalan, director of School of Foreign Languages, for their unwavering commitment to language research and supporting this conference. Thank you. To all of the members of the organizing committee for their dedicated work. And in particular, I want to say thank you to Dr. Hatice Altoun for her leadership, intellectual direction, and tremendous dedication to the field of language studies and applied linguistics. I want to thank Dr. Altoun for her invitation to be part of this exciting event. I am proud to call her a colleague, a friend, and an important new voice in the field of applied linguistics. Hatice, you have put together an impressive event, and it is a pleasure to be part of it. It is an event that will resonate for many, many years, and it will provide the intellectual engagement and direction for the future. So I want to thank you for undertaking such an impressive event, putting it together, and it is pleasure to be part of it. I would like to thank everyone who is joining today, faculty, staff, and students and administrators. Let me begin by noting that education today throughout the world is undergoing a transformation, the like of which we have not experienced for many decades. The import of digital technologies, and for us as applied linguists, the phenomenon of the introduction of English as a medium of instruction, EMI, in many of the higher educational national contexts have redefined our practices. It has made us come back with renewed energy to some of the key questions of how best can we ensure the success and college readiness of our students. It has foregrounded key questions of access, equity, and quality of education. I believe that this is an exciting time for applied linguistics that places the field and scholars in interdisciplinary and cross-academic unit collaborations in institutions of higher education. This time also calls for substantive reflections, analysis, and research with sensitivity to each local context. I will argue that there is a need for a framework that is sensitive to K-12 context and transitions that students need to make to higher education to succeed. In my talk today, I want to draw attention to the interconnections between all the three levels of P16 education. First, I will outline some of the trends in higher education, paying attention to the demands that are placed on today's multilinguals. Second, I will share with you my research that I have done with young bilingual learners in schools in New York, in the state of New York, that have provided me with a richer understanding of my role as an educator in higher education. Where both contexts converge is around the need for what I call multilingual proficiency. I bring these two contexts, higher education and K-12, with the goal of us thinking of the connections, research, and policies that maximize the advancement of language and cultural learning. I believe that we are presented with an educational and linguistic challenge and an opportunity. So as you see, here's the talk, the outline of my talk. So let me now move to the first part, the trends in higher education. So there are two major trends in higher education that I want to draw our attention to. First, the shift in the function of English as a medium of instruction. As higher education and universities internationalize, English as a medium instruction became a major trend. I locate the shift to English as a medium of instruction as one of the most significant processes that impacts English education and the field of applied linguistics today. While English continues to be one of the main languages taught as a subject in many national school systems, English now increasingly serves as a medium of instruction in a growing number of schools and particularly in universities worldwide. Students in many universities outside of what is thought of as English-speaking contexts now pursue their university education in English in content areas like business, medicine, and engineering. We can, for example, see this process unfolding in the European Union, as detailed in a recent study devoted to the topic of English medium instruction in the 28 EU member states, supported by the European Commission's Directorate General for Education and Culture and published by the Academic Cooperation Association. The authors count more than 8,000 what's called ETPs, a steep growth when compared to the 725 such ETPs in 2001. The study notes that there is, quote, there is now little doubt that a critical mass of ETPs is on offer across non-English speaking Europe, end quote, with the Netherlands, Germany, Sweden, France taking the lead in terms of numbers. It continues, quote, one of the policy priorities in Europe and increasingly elsewhere in the world, too, has been to remove or reduce barriers, possibly preventing students from becoming internationally mobile. The shift in the function of English in academia is a significant modification of the earlier role of English as a so-called foreign language. It carries important implications for getting students ready, ensuring quality instruction in earlier grades, especially at the secondary school level, to equip them with the advanced language proficiencies to study and be assessed in English in a range of subjects at the university level. The use of English as a medium of instruction requires a high level of language proficiencies on the part of students, faculty, and administration to deliver curricula. It requires careful design in terms of language and contents objectives in programs. And research on this model is still in its early stages. So here you see information data on a second issue that I wanted to highlight in higher education. And again, this trend places incredible demands on multilinguals today. The second important issue, trend in higher education, that places demands on multilinguals is scientific dissemination. Scholarly publishing in top-tier international venues has become almost synonymous with publishing in English. Data, as you have seen on the graph and in this data, point out that over 90% of articles in the natural sciences are written in English, and more than 70% in the social sciences and humanities. We see small differences across disciplinary boundaries, with the highest average in English publishing in mathematics and physics. In response, many nations have created a reward system that privileges English language publications. However we measure it, the role of English in knowledge dissemination is significant. It determines the need for high levels of proficiency to both understand and produce academic professional writing. There is much more to it than mere disciplinary terminology. It reinforces the need for advanced academic literacy in English. And I make that distinction, language proficiency and advanced academic literacy in English. This becomes an important issue as I look further into the voices of students as I will be presenting to you. Given the demands of publishing, professional expectations can be very high in our world. Such academic literacy is not innate, but developed over a lengthy process of formal education. That reality in turn affects the primary and secondary school levels. Two subjects in a recent study of mine illustrate the point. And if we take a look at the next slide, so here we see two subjects from my study, Amira and Alala, who were both enrolled in EMI PhD programs and both initially struggled with the workload. The problem in the mind of others was too often their alleged shortcomings as English users. But the challenges Amira and Lala faced as PhD students were not functions of studying in a second language. What overwhelmed Amira and Lala in their doctoral programs was the sheer quantitative demands on them in terms of reading and writing. Their previous education in either Arabic or English had not properly prepared them for the reading and writing load they faced. The problem was not that they could not read and write in English. The problem was that they were not used to such a demanding reading and writing load in either Arabic or English. Their P16 education had not adequately prepared them for what they faced in their PhD studies. What appeared to be a simple issue of struggling in a second language was really something entirely different. Both received bilingual education throughout their schooling, and we would be hard-pressed to judge whether English or Arabic was their first language. But to their frustration, no one noticed their high-level proficiency in English because we have become accustomed to ascribing first or second languages to language users and assuming perfect competence in the one and incomplete in the other. As Arabic speakers, it was simply assumed that their English was non-native. These linguistically accomplished multilinguals were being perceived through the distorting lens of a deficit model that did not at all match their lived reality. The limitations of the notions of L1 and L2 in the case of multilinguals like Amira and Lala led me to want to rethink how we describe a multilingual's knowledge of language. The truth is that Amira and Lala are both incredibly well qualified to be multilingual professionals by virtue of what I call their multilingual proficiency. By multilingual proficiency, I mean a person's total linguistic proficiency across 2 or more languages. I do not have in mind here mere awareness of other languages, as we hear so much about today with respect to the multilingual classroom. I mean knowledge of these languages, the entire knowledge base in language, including literacy across languages. The notion of multilingual proficiency is meant to underscore knowledge that the learner develops in the process of language learning. It recognizes that language learning capacities among students are virtually without limits, and conceptually, it does not limit itself as a model to 1 or 2 languages. There are components of language learning, such as literacy skills, that are metalinguistic, and it was these skills that had not been sufficiently honed in Amira and Lala's prior to their doctoral studies. Multilingual proficiency recognizes that there is an aspect of language learning in the form of knowledge of language that is acquired in the study of multiple languages, as in their case. That knowledge of language acquired in studying languages in turn aids learning additional languages or acquiring additional metalinguistic skills. Multilingual proficiency development constitutes an intellectual endeavor in which, in the process of language learning, a language uses their knowledge from various languages. Thus, taking knowledge as its point of departure, multilingual proficiency becomes an objective measure of language learning from its early stages all the way through the attainment of advanced level of proficiency in multiple languages. We can measure the high level of language proficiency of multilingual professionals like Amira and Lala, and we have the responsibility to do so as applied linguists. For it makes it clear that they were confronting not a linguistic deficit, but an educational shortcoming, literacy training in earlier levels of schools. So if we move to the next slide, this brings me to the second part of the talk, the K-12 context, where we see the incredible linguistic resources that multilingual students bring with them to the classroom. A focus of my research is how schools can capitalize on these capabilities. How do we best build the kind of literacy multilingual professionals require today in the world? I would like to bring some insights from a 2-year study that I carried out of second grade and 6th grade students in a dual language program in New York, in the state of New York. So let me say a little about the context of the study and the main findings, some lessons that perhaps can be applicable to other educational studies. So on this slide, we see linguistic and cultural diversity in New York State. Here we see a good picture of linguistic and cultural diversity that I will be reporting on in the study. First, is, as you see on this slide, looking at this data, New York State is linguistically and culturally diverse state with over 200 languages present, with three languages that dominate. Spanish, the highest share, 64.5% of languages spoken in the state, then Chinese and Arabic, 79% of about 79.3%, these three languages occupied. New York State is one of the 5 states with the highest proportion of English language learners, along with California, Texas, Florida, and Illinois. Based on the National Center of Educational Statistics, more than 4.8 million English language learners, or approximately 10% of public school students, are enrolled in U.S. public schools. This population is a rapidly growing part of K-12 student population. So this is an incredible linguistic and cultural resource that we in schools should capitalize in order to build societal multilingualism and bilinguals. These linguistically diverse student populations have stimulated different forms of curricula and program designs in our field. There's growing evidence that heritage language literacy among students plays a significant role in their academic development, especially with respect to their post-secondary 4-year college entrance. So if you look at the next slide, I'm going to share with you the numbers, statistics on the programs in US as a total number, dual language schools and immersion programs. That's a high number, 1,702 total dual language school immersion programs that were registered in the US just recently. And out of this, you see in the state of New York, 600, more than 600 bilingual programs, but a large proportions of these programs are dual language programs. 239 of them were dual language programs. And this is the program that was particularly interesting to me to explore its potential educationally and linguistically with this student population that I just highlighted in public schools. Now, in the state of New York, we also have a very progressive policy. It's called Seal of Biliteracy. And this Seal of Biliteracy is a way how states encourage administratively the learning of second languages. So students who acquire proficiency in a second foreign language on the high school diploma, they gain a seal of biliteracy, the acknowledgement of higher levels of proficiency in a second language. And currently 36 states and Washington, D.C. have approved a statewide seal of biliteracy. So the next slide gives you a little bit more about the details of this policy at the state level. Briefly, the intent of this policy is to affirm the value of diversity in a multilingual society, encourage the study of languages, identify high school graduates with language and biliteracy skills for employers. So in a nutshell, it really, from a policy standpoint, it pushes the affirmation of language learning among high school students. Okay, the next. So here in our field, we have a number of curricular designs, but the program that offers perhaps the best outcomes in terms of bilingual learning and proficiency is dual language program. So in terms of its purpose and goals is to develop biliteracy and bilingualism in English and in the home target language. and to cultivate positive intercultural and multicultural attitudes and behaviors. The second, also quite common model in schools in US is the transitional model. This model, unlike the dual language, uses the home language to continue to learn content while learning English. So it is transitional model. It really is to mainstream students or assimilate them to the majority, whereas the dual language program focuses more on development of biliteracy and bilingualism. The allocation of languages in terms of languages used during the school also varies. In the ideal world, when this program is delivered, generally 50% of English and 50% of home language is used to achieve the goals, that is biliteracy among students. Whereas with the transitional model, that decreases quite significantly and students are progressing through the school. So if we go to the next slide, this is the study summary of data that I have collected over a period of 2 years in 9 classrooms in grades 2, 3, and 6. So the number of classrooms that participated were 9. The total number of students, 166. I put together a research team. This is a study that was supported by Terra Foundation. So I was able to put together a research team to help me with classroom observations. So you can see the number, this higher level of involvement in the classroom observations, the number of visits that we made, the number of hours, audio recordings, and classroom instructional practices. We had 9 teachers whom we interviewed who twice during each year. We had surveys, questionnaires for them. We also had student questionnaires, interviews for both for teachers and for students. And importantly, which is not easy to get, is standardized scores that students achieved in English, math, as well as self-assessment and teacher assessment in Spanish. Okay, so this gives you the scope, the breadth of the data that I have generated over the period of 2 years. So if we move to the next slide, this gives you a little bit more information that the study was conducted in an urban school in the largest school district in the state of New York. And the school enrolls approximately a total of 728 students, and predominantly students speak Spanish. And this brings me back to the earlier point in terms of diversity in the state of New York. So 82.4% of students are Latinx, and other diversities were identified as well. So in terms of my reporting, I'm going to share data with you for students in grade 2, for a cohort of students, for 37 students in spring 2017 in 4 classes. And these are students who averaged 8 years old. They lived, importantly, in the US for 3.3 years, this is mean, and attended the current school for 2.3 years. So they are bilingual students. Most of them reported that Spanish was their dominant home language. And they were most comfortable with Spanish. So this gives you sort of a portrait of second grade students, participants in the first study that I want to report for you. If you will look at next slide, you see that across all language skills, students in the sample are more proficient in Spanish than in English. The gaps are relatively large in productive skills, speaking and writing. And the evaluation shows that children's reading in English is least developed than writing. So it's the literacy that and in English in particular that lags behind. So these students, as I said earlier, they identify and they were evaluated as more dominant in Spanish. Next. So we know from current literature from our studies that children's early language and literate competence serve as the foundation for later reading abilities and overall academic success. And Alan Bialystok emphasizes, it underscores the importance of early literacy in a major way. And I found this to be very important. And I brought this quote for you. Quote, "The pinnacle of young children's educational development is the acquisition of literacy. Literacy is the ticket of entry into our society. It is the currency by which social and economic positions are waged, and it is the central purpose of schooling." This comes from literacy studies in the first language and the importance of early literacies. What I was in this study, what I was interested is to examine the literacy development among bilingual students. So the next slide will give you clear idea the kind of research that I posed with respect to this student population. Number one, how do young bilingual children's language and literacy proficiencies in Spanish and English relate to each other? And this is important in the context of what I brought with Amira and Laila in terms of literacy and the schooling, the training. But I was interested to examine this particular phenomenon with respect to this bilingual student population that they were going through dual language program. So this first research question taps exactly into the relationship between Spanish literacy and English literacy and language. The second one that I wanted to, the research question that I wanted to answer is, how do children's bilingual identity and aspirations for bilingual and biliteracy development relate to language and literacy proficiencies in both languages? Often it is the attitudes, the identity, how we identify may or may not play a role in terms of language proficiencies. So I wanted to examine this question again with respect to this student population in the bilingual school in the dual language program. And the third important question, how do children develop bilingualism and biliteracy across home and school context? So I was bringing in the importance of home literacy exploration to shed light how language and literacies develop among this student population. So the research design, it was mixed methods. We used quantitative and qualitative data, and you saw the data that earlier on the slide that was generated and standardized in New York State on English test, NICELED, and math scores as well. So next. So I want to to give you key findings that I have identified. Number one, the correlation between English proficiency and Spanish proficiency. There is clear relationship between Spanish literacy and English literacy. Students who were proficient in Spanish literacy, reading and writing, were more likely to be proficient in English literacy as well. So the first language literacy plays a positive and significant role. Correlation analysis shows that Spanish reading and writing is correlated with 4 English skills, showing moderate to strong correlations. The strongest relationships were found between English reading and Spanish reading. So interesting, right? Students who were more proficient in reading in Spanish, that translated the strongest correlation to English reading. And then it followed in terms of writing, English writing and Spanish writing. We see that Spanish reading showed a positive relationship with standardized scores on English tests. So the bottom line here is that early biliteracy is important. So that's answering research question 1. If we, I wanted to also show you some qualitative research from the study. So if we move to the next one, yes, students chose this school because they understood that they could continue learning both languages. And here's these are second graders. I was so impressed the way they were able to articulate many questions, and they were metacognitive about language learning and literacy. So excerpt 2, do you know why you chose these schools? And the student answered, because it is bilingual. This way I learn English much faster. And then they also articulate, is it important for you to continue learning Spanish? And notice, yes, because if I speak in English a lot, I can forget my Spanish. And so what I try in my better to read in Spanish and in English, because like that, I can't forget my Spanish. It helps me with my English. So the students recognize the language relationships between Spanish and English, and here nicely articulating how reading takes place in both languages. So next. So the second question that I had is the relationship between bilingual identity and how it is related to language proficiency. So students who had positive bilingual identity tended to be proficient in both English and Spanish languages and score high on the New York standardized scores. And home and school climate was found to be important for cultivating affirming identities and aspirations. And teachers' roles, I will show you later how critical they were in terms of underscoring and creating that affirmation in terms of student bilingual identities. But the point here is that the positive bilingual identity, it matters in terms of language development. If you look at next slide, we see teachers, qualitative data in terms of students, students really showing how positive and proud they are to speak both languages in the bilingual school. The next slide will show you how teachers were strategic in terms of building learner community. So first, teachers were grouping students in terms of language abilities and creating that sense of children helping each other learning both languages. So here the teachers were very strategic in terms of how they group students and help them to collaborate in terms of developing languages. And so that's one strategy. The second one that teachers use is building partnerships with parents to support home literacy, and that came very clearly from interviews with the teachers. Teachers were sending materials in Spanish home in order to build that first language literacy. So building learner community was a critical and intentional strategy on the part of the teachers, and building the partnerships among with home to build Spanish language and positive relationships between parents as well as school. If we look at the next slide, we also see the teacher. This is an excerpt from interactions. The teacher uses student, even though it was in the English language arts classroom, wherever the communicative necessity arose, teachers were able and intentionally drew on students' linguistic resources. And here we see how the teacher here uses semiotic resources in the classroom to build climate and uses the first language, uses students' resources. So I understand that not everybody speaks Spanish here, but this is to illustrate how teachers use those multilingual resources in the classroom and draw on children's language abilities. And this is, to my point, how multilingual proficiency as knowledge develops in the classroom, and teachers intentionally use the first language or languages in the class. The next slide shows data from teachers' priorities in the dual language program. What really stands out, this is for teachers who worked with second grade students. What stands out is that all of the teachers focus on building biliteracy, reading and writing in both languages. They also attend to affective aspects, building confidence among learners, encourage students to value bilingualism, and obviously build other productive skills, including technology integration. Not as heavily in all of them, nevertheless, some teachers attend to that. So I want you to keep in mind this data and the findings from the second grade. Now I'm going to move to highlight data from the sixth grade cohort, and the number of students that participated here is 53 students, and I want to highlight major findings because there is an interesting issue going on, even though we are working with dual language program. But here, what we also will see is that bilingualism is not easily to maintain or develop, and sometimes schools can be a place where not even dual language program, not full proficiency in the first language can be maintained. So this is a challenge. And in the sixth grade, what we see is that all 4 English skills show positive upward tendency. And I will show you that in a moment in graphs. The longer the students attended the schools, the higher the level of English proficiency. We observe the higher level of English proficiency. Students face challenges, even though they are, as we know that they came with Spanish as their dominant language. Students face challenges in sustaining learning the 2 languages in school. They seem to maintain their Spanish reading proficiency, but not in all across 4 skills. Incipient, what sometimes in the field we call language shift, apparently due to the perceived need of learning English over Spanish. English is viewed as the academic language, test language, and Spanish at times is viewed as home language. So as you see in the next slide, this is data from student proficiency evaluation. So you see English proficiency in listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Across all 4 language skills, we see an upward trajectory. So students are improving in English. Now, if you look at Spanish, this is their what sometimes is referred native language, right? Spanish listening, speaking, reading, and writing. We see a different tendency here, right? And this is in a dual language program in a 6th grade. So let me briefly share a case of Isabel, next slide, how she self-evaluates both Spanish and in English. So notice she is 11-year-old, 6th grader. She arrived at the age of 4. She's native speaker of Spanish. She lived in the US for 7 years and attended the school for 5 years. She reported that Spanish was her dominant home language, but she was highly motivated to learn English. That comes from interviews with the student. And she wants to attend college or university as her future plan. But on her self-evaluation, look how she evaluates Spanish in terms of her abilities. Speaking 9, reading 9, writing 7, understanding 8. Notice how she evaluates English. 10, which is the highest in terms of the score that she was given a chance to evaluate on this rubric. So I charted this student's development of bilingualism, and you will see that graphed on the next slide. So here she comes as a native speaker of Spanish, right? At the age of 4, she arrives at the United States and she's continuing learning Spanish and English, but English becomes a more dominant. Spanish still continues, and there's the interaction sort of between Spanish and English, and students in interviews talked about the relationship between those 2 languages and how they draw on each other. But English becomes the more dominant language. So here it's multilingual proficiency at work. What is important here is her total proficiency in both languages, and perhaps less so important which language is her L1 and which one is her L2, because notice Spanish here is actually decreasing in comparison to English. Really interesting dynamic going on with this student. So if we look, so we can posit the question, why is that happening? And in the next slide, I'm sharing the data with you in terms of the importance of critical role of teachers. So students view teachers as authority figures, and the teacher's use of language might be one of the variables that contributes how much students use a given language and obviously how they relate. So definitely teachers' role as authority figures contributes to students' choices and bilingual learning. In qualitative data, in the next slide, you will see that these young learners are remarkably metacognitive as to why they chose this school and how that contributes to learning both languages. So what we see from this data from grade 2 as well as from grade 6 students' positive bilingual identity matters. Positive bilingual identity was associated with both English and Spanish proficiency on standardized test scores. Okay. Let's see here. Despite the many challenges that students face in sustaining both Spanish and English, they do view themselves as they are very proud, as I showed to you earlier with the data, and they have positive self-image as bilingual students. They are proud and they aspire to learn both languages. So summarizing the two parts of my talk, I brought the notion of multilingual proficiency in the case of Amira and Lala. And this notion is also important how we view the knowledge of language and literacy of the young learners in this study from the state of New York, as it is also in the case clearly shown in the case of Isabel. The construct multilingual proficiency underscores language as knowledge, similar to math, science that students learn. And the construct stays away and it moves away from looking at bilinguals or multilinguals from the paradigm of deficiency or incomplete systems. And it allows us to study their knowledge in an objective sense, with the goal in our schools teaching, with the goal moving them through attainment of advanced levels of proficiency and literacies. And I have shown to you how first language proficiency is correlated with subsequent literacies that students achieve. So in summarizing the different points that I brought, what I want to underscore is that multilinguals are becoming the norm. We see that in our schools, we see that in the societies. We need educational and linguistic paradigms based on that norm rather than monolingual paradigms. And Hatice, if you could bring back that summary point, thank you. Higher education places significant demands on multilinguals, and this is what I underscored in the first part of the talk in terms of publishing and in terms of the kind of challenges we have on English as a multilingual, English as a medium of instruction. And multilingual proficiency takes the learner's perspective and recognizes language as knowledge that learners draw on and are metacognitive of. Monolingual paradigms in linguistic theory are challenged by contemporary learners. Dual language programs aid students' positive self-image and societal bilingualism. Bilingual teachers need continuous professional development and school support. And to summarize the role of applied linguistics, I think that applied linguists are central to understanding K-12, the connections that it has to higher education and its success, and ultimately to knowledge economy and to nations' competitiveness and nations' knowledge economy development. So on this note, I would like to end and thank all of you for being part of this plenary. And I don't know whether we have time for any questions, Hatice, but that concludes my presentation at this moment. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this very insightful presentation, Professor Rutgerfer. Unfortunately, we don't have the chat box available or enabled. So if you have any questions, I would ask you to raise your hands and I'll let you speak and ask your questions to Professor Brutt-Griffler. I see Hong Long Zhou's hands raised. So
Yeah,
you just need to turn your microphone on and then ask your question.
And
can you hear me? Yeah.
we may.
Okay.
Yeah, we hear you.
Yeah, I do have a question, but not related to the lecture. I'm not sure whether I'm in the right virtual hall because according to my brochure, I should be in the virtual hall 1.
Yeah, unfortunately, the session has gone over 15 minutes more, so you need to wait. I just thought that you were going to ask a question to our keynote speaker. Please wait for a while.
Okay, because I'm not sure whether I'm in the correct virtual hall.
Yes, you are in the correct virtual hall.
Okay.
Keep waiting,
okay,
please.
That's good.
I have seen, yeah, I have some other hands raised. What are they? Hocam, yeah. Seher İşcan. Yes, Seher Hocam. Do you need to ask your question?
Yeah, I think now it is.
Yeah, I tried to put you on the spotlight. Yeah. Recep Aslan is our director, Professor Brutt-Griffler. Let me introduce him.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Welcome here. So thank you so much. I think there's kind of echoing of the sound here. Sorry about it. Can you hear me?
Not clearly. I can hear Hatice quite clearly. Hatice, maybe you can rephrase the question.
Yeah, if I can hear it, yeah.
Okay.
Let's try that way.
Sorry about it. Thank you so much for accepting to become a beginner speaker.
My pleasure.
Okay, then your speech, your presentation has been really informative on these multilingual proficiency. In Turkey, if I in the School of Foreign Languages, we have a prep program, and we aim at educating students for the medium research in English. I'd like to learn how these students can reach academic literacy and also language proficiency at the same time. Would it be possible the one-year program to educate these students in both language and English and also academic literacy?
Were you able to understand? I wasn't because.
Yeah, it's very hard for me to hear. What I heard is your concern about developing academic literacies. Am I correct?
And both linguistic proficiency.
And form linguistic proficiency, he says.
Yes, I think writing across content area, that is teaching students to write to learn. So it's not just writing, but thinking about writing to learn so that they are writing about interesting topics. So it's about curriculum design. What I find now is we are implementing approach across first year. So this, we have international students as well as domestic students. And the approach that I find to be very productive for students is to write across what we call write across curriculum. That is, they are learning to write the advanced proficiencies, but they are also learning the content areas. It becomes more challenging, but it incorporates conventions, literacy, as well as reading, challenging tasks, and we are attending to language that is specific for different genres. So it is building genre approach built into content writing. So it's helping students to learn to write, literacy, reading, writing, but it is connected to content areas. Yeah. Does that help?
You're muted. Professor, you're on. Please unmute yourself. It's muted. Your computer is muted. He doesn't hear probably. Thank you for the response. Are there any other questions and comments? Unfortunately, the session in the other halls has started. Probably the planning was kind of postponed. So are there any other, if there are no other comments, I'd like to end the session and extend my thanks to Professor Brutt-Griffler again. Thank you again, Professor Brutt-Griffler, for this very, very interesting and insightful presentation. Hopefully you could come in person and visit us in person too and share your studies and insights with us once more or in the future again.
I would be most delighted, Hatice, and I look forward to collaboration, both in terms of research and in terms of curricula. So I'm really delighted to be part of this event, to have this really exciting intellectual exchanges, and those conversations, I'm sure, are going to be productive for future developments. I would love to, whenever possible, to come and to work with you. You are all invited to come to New York, whether you are on a sabbatical leave or in any other capacity. I wanted to extend my warm invitation to you, to your colleagues, to the director of your school. So really, keep me posted if there is any way that we can, on your end, that we can collaborate. And definitely we can collaborate online. But I'm excited about this beginning and meeting your colleagues and having an opportunity to contribute to this very impressive event. And I know that it is a challenge for you and for the school to put it together. But yeah. I wish you all the best. And it's you have to be bold to
thank you.
And to continue. And I wish you the best in terms of continuing this line of work, and also looking for research and funding opportunities to resource your research, both in national as well as international levels. So I would like to encourage you in that way, because in order to carry out large studies, you really need some team building, support, and funding. And I think that is something that it's important to think about. The study that I presented from, it actually was supported by Terra Foundation, as I reported, and very much driven by the leadership from our local bilingual Turkish colleagues. So how about that?
So, that's interesting. Yeah,
that's very interesting. So we have colleagues here who are very committed to charter school building in the state of New York, and science education as well.
Yeah.
So Terra
We're
Foundation.
actually experiencing similar kind of bilingualism in Turkey. I mean, not in terms of Spanish. In your case, it was Spanish and Chinese, but we're experiencing more of a Persian and Arabic on our end. So we'll be conducting some bilingual and multilingual studies soon, I guess. Thank you for your insight again, for your contribution. And we're looking forward to collaborate with you in the future. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you. And all the best to everyone.
Yes.
And I will see you perhaps in other sessions later in the day and tomorrow.
Yes, yes. Thank you again.
Thank you.